Hello, and welcome. So, my name is Danny, and here we have my wonderful co host, JT.
Hello.
And this is a new show. If you are familiar with, I appear regularly on the Victory Lane Vibes podcast, the NASCAR podcast. JT has made an appearance as well. However, we decided to form a bit of a breakaway and move beyond NASCAR. So we are looking at the likes of IndyCar, endurance racing, sports car racing. Um, Maybe sprinkle a little bit of the Max Verstappen championship in there a little bit, but we'll see. Um, so, JT?
So, I guess we'll start off by saying, like how we got into racing, why we watch it. At least for me, it started during the pandemic, just because there wasn't anything else to really do but racing. So I started off watching NASCAR. Then I found just like a bunch of other racing series to watch, and pretty much just like branched off from there. I actually don't really watch NASCAR that much. I know I've said it on the other podcast, the main one when I was on there, but I'm just reiterating it again because you'll probably like find me on Twitter talking about like various different racing series um, and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yes, and I have been following motorsports broadly since I was a little kid. I started with sports car racing back when it was still the American Le Mans series in the mid aughts. It would have been towards the end of the GT1 class regs. Around the time that I started, grew up in Detroit, so went to the Belle Isle Grand Prix a number of times, and during that, and I have followed motorsports ever since, really. Although in the pandemic, I had a lot more time to follow these things, admittedly.
So basically, I feel like we should at least have some sort of like audience interaction. So, like, if you listen to this and you have any like specific topics or like specific like things you want us to address or talk about, discuss, whatever, feel free to like let us know. Okay, like we'll note make a note of it and we'll try and talk about it to the best of our ability. And if you also want us to maybe get guests on the show, also tell us that too. There's at least like maybe two guests I've thought about maybe possibly reaching out to and seeing if we could get them on the show because I think it would be pretty amazing if we could.
Yes, that would reiterate. That would be absolutely fantastic. The main pod scored a guest here recently. Actually, yes, just yesterday, as of the time of this recording, September 7th. The main pod had Brad Perez on, so hopefully we can bag some similar big fish. So if you know anybody, let us know.
All right. So, I guess we should get into the first topic that we are going to discuss, which is reviewing the Portland GP that happened this past weekend. We have the next Laguna Seca coming up, which is the finale, the final race of the IndyCar season. So basically, what were your thoughts, Danny?
So I, broadly speaking, I enjoyed the race. Looking at show notes, we've got some bits that we will get to in a second that were cause for some consternation, but broadly a good race. Interestingly enough, watching like Ray Hall and Dixon, they started on the alternates and for the first stint, and it did not work at all. Lost stacks of time, basically every pit cycle. And plus tire fall off was something fierce too. Which was interesting. I figure, maybe this was the race that Ray Hall would finally get it done, and that didn't happen at all. And it also, unfortunately, meant that the championship has slipped through Dixon's hands too, as a direct result of this. Um, but
I mean,
overall,
RFL seems like they are somehow they've managed to improve like a lot at least on road courses. I mean, their oval setup, yeah, still kind of rough, but I mean, they seem to be trending in the right direction at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is, good to see. Say what you will about the rolling trash fire that seems to be the Rahal organization as a whole at the moment, but um, certainly, yes, car performance has improved massively since the start of the season on road courses, namely, and are definitely we're moving in the right direction. We'll see if this momentum is sustained into Laguna Seca, and then likewise into the off season, we'll have to kind of see what happens. But certainly, if you had asked me, in June, where I thought, any of the RLL cars would be, it certainly isn't here contending for race wins periodically.
Yeah, unfortunately, we had Jack Harvey a few races ago got sacked mid-season. I think the speculation there for why that occurred was the leader circle that is infamous in IndyCar, but nobody really knows too much about it. Um, at least what I was really surprised was that there were no calamities going into turn one at the first lap at the start, which I was like, I feel like gold star for the whole field right there. I gave everybody a cookie because honestly, I was totally expecting there to just be a huge stack up and a lot of nonsense to happen. There was some clumsiness in Indy Next, unfortunately, that did get some people caught up, unfortunately. But IndyCar seemed to be relatively clean.
Yeah, relatively calm. It's kind of funny. The two circuits that are most infamous, especially on the back half of the calendar, for just massive, namely turn one issues, Portland and Nashville, Crashville. There just was nothing. Everybody behaved themselves, which is again also a far cry from the start of the season. St. Pete was a nightmare. Lap one, turn one, and Detroit was actually kind of a crash fest too.
I mean, Detroit was kind of expected to be a crash fest just because of the new layout, so nobody really knew what to expect. It was kind of just chaos. Everybody
Hmm.
for themselves. So, at least a few talking points that I've seen people discuss after the race. One of them in particular is, I guess, it's been ongoing because this is not the first race that this has happened, where it's like lapped cars. All right, I guess like there's a lot of frustration and anger from like I guess it's mainly veteran drivers like having issues with lapped cars during like qualifying. Like we saw like Grosjean like kind of like seemed pretty frustrated and irate over that. Even after the race, there was an interview that they were talking about. They interviewed Pato, and he seemed kind of frustrated and like telling them like, "Yeah, you guys have to like get out of the way." I personally don't know how I feel about this because I'm like, at the same time, like, yeah, lap cars need to like kind of like get out of the way for leaders, especially if you're like lapped down and it's pretty late in the race. You're probably not going to be able to do much. However, I feel like the leaders have a responsibility, or at least like they have to get around them somehow. Like they're just gonna be there. I know a lot of people were saying, oh, a solution would be to just like blue flag them so they wouldn't be holding people up. I don't really know.
Yeah, I was just about to say IndyCar doesn't have any proper blue flag procedure, unlike some other categories. Um, it feels like a lot of undue moaning from the veterans. It's like you. This is certainly not your first time around the block. You kind of know how this works, And truth be told, if you're a lap. If you're going on somebody about to put them a lap down, then chances are you are significantly quicker anyway. You can get around them. Um, yes, there's certainly I don't want to say responsibility because I feel like that's a bit too firm, but there is certainly lap cars should be cognizant of when the leaders are coming up behind them. And I mean, with between radio and communications, they know these things, um,
For sure.
and not be like, not be too much of a rolling roadblock. Like you said, late in the race, it's definitely something. Just move. You're not making up that time. If you're talking, 5, 10 laps left, there's no way you're making up that gap. But if you're talking, kind of middle of the race, second stint, there is some incentive to fight the leaders a bit to stay on the lead lap, and maybe this is where, and perhaps I'm also putting too much faith in race control, but maybe this is where they need to delegate a bit more. Okay, all right, whoever, Lucas, Kirkwood, Grosjean, whoever, whatever. Okay, move out of the way, buddy. But again, I do also think perhaps I'm putting a little bit too much faith in race control to actually make intelligent, fast decisions like that.
I mean, honestly, IndyCar race control has been getting a lot of blowback from fans this season, and honestly, like some of it's warranted because they have been like very inconsistent. I'm not sure like when this started, like when this inconsistency started with them, but I just know like a lot of people have been pretty like they just don't think that it's been handled the best, and I kind of agree. Another thing that really caused like a big discourse was when they allowed Felix to pit before throwing a yellow. And what I'm gonna say about that is that they've been doing that the whole season. It's just that people finally clocked it when it was one driver that they were waiting on. Like they had been doing this the whole time. It just was particularly egregious in this sense because it was one freaking person that they were waiting on. It's like people finally just like figured it out. It's like, yes, maybe they'll get enough blowback that they'll eventually change that and it's not a thing anymore. Because
Mhm.
honestly, that's what I'm hoping for at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was really bad this time. Like you had said, they had been able to kind of stealth it before because maybe it was quarter of the field, half the field, whatever. So it was a bit more difficult to spot. But yes, waiting on one car to make it around the rest of the lap. And it might have been Pillow in the post race that said, well, what's the point of a caution then at that point? It was either Pillow or maybe it was Pato. I don't remember. But what's the point of a caution if you're going to spend all that time waiting for one guy to get around the circuit to then throw out the yellow? You might as well just not. And I agree. But also, frankly, even if it's not just one guy, even if it is a large chunk of the field, that's that fundamentally, I actually not fundamentally, it completely undermines kind of the point of a caution period, which is, accident, cleanup, stranded car, and that needs to be retrieved. Now thankfully because of IndyCar caution procedure, they're not going to let the AMR safety team out on track before they do that. But I feel like that is something that is going to, and probably sooner rather than later, end in tears in a quite a quite a catastrophic way. I think something is going to go horribly wrong, and they'll wait for somebody for the caution, and then basically make potentially what is a bad situation that much worse. And of course, I hope it doesn't come to that, but that's usually when you have stuff like this and a relatively lackadaisical attitude, especially from race control of all people, it usually takes something fairly large to get them to reverse course.
I mean, even like back at, I think it was the second Iowa race, they were even a little bit lax there because they waited a long time to throw a caution for a loose wheel on the track, which like was that could have been a lot worse than it was. Luckily, it just like bounced around. It didn't like hit anybody's car, or whatever. I guess apparently, I'm not really sure what happened there, but apparently people were saying that like they did not have cameras all around the track that allowed them to see that had happened. So I'm like, I don't know. Especially with as small as a track as Iowa is, it's a very small oval. I think they should be able to see that that is what's going on. Like it's one thing if it was like a road course or something where it's a lot longer and it takes a long time to like get around the whole track, but you know, an oval, I don't really know about that.
Yeah, I don't buy that either. And also, especially given that race control does have access to all team radios, I can't imagine that the drivers weren't sounding off about a loose wheel bouncing around for a considerable amount of time. And this is, part of why I say perhaps asking race control to do anything else is giving them entirely too much credit and is making it entirely too high an assumption because they absolutely have tools to mitigate that, even if for whatever reason that I don't entirely buy that they don't have cameras dotted about the place. That doesn't, especially like you said, a short oval like Iowa, that doesn't make any sense to me at all that they could be that blissfully unaware of a loose wheel, especially given, so soon after Indy and the admittedly happy ending that had, but a loose wheel parting company from basically leaving the circuit entirely.
Like Final Destination almost.
Yes, like I said, thank goodness there was nobody out in the courtyard when that happened. Uh,
So the next thing that um, was causing a lot of discourse. I mean, I guess at this point, this is just like a grill IndyCar race control segment. But the Pelot blocking call controversy, where people were like, "Oh yeah, I think it was Pelot and Castro Neves who it was," and people are like, "Oh yeah, that was definitely blocking," because earlier they had nailed Kirkwood for a similar move that put Ryan Hunter-Reay, I think it was, in the grass, and they're like, "Yeah, that's blocking penalty." I think they told him to give back some positions or something like that. But then the same thing happened with Pelot, and the broadcast was like, "Oh, race control didn't even look at that," and it's like everybody was just so like, it was just funny seeing just like all the tweets and the reactions to that. But I'm like, people were sure that they were even like, even the broadcast was making it seem like that they actually looked at it, but just like decided that there was no action that was going to be taken on it, but they didn't even look at it. And then it's like, not like a few like minutes later, a few laps later, they nailed Kirkwood again for another like blocking, and then people are like, okay, like again, once again with the inconsistency. And some people were speculating that they were being a little bit lax with Pelot just because like he was about to win the championship and that it would have somehow affected the outcome of the race or the championship. And honestly, I'm I don't know. I don't really think it would have had that big of an effect on his race or the championship just because like he was so far ahead of everybody. That's like it probably wouldn't have made a difference. It just would have been nice to see again like consistency from them. If you're gonna like nail people on that, you probably should just like do it across the board.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was so bad from race control. Because that was a very, very aggressive block. I mean, everybody kept it together. It wasn't the Ryan ending up off the circuit, but that should have absolutely been a penalty. And I don't know how they didn't even look at it because and then definitely the reactions because I sounded off a bit about this on Twitter. Um, it's almost a lot of the thoughts, opinions floating around. It almost implies that they ignored it. I don't know if that's quite accurate, but I also can't imagine how they would have missed that. I don't get it. Um, but yeah, that was a horrible call to not take, regardless of what the circumstances are. To not investigate that at all was atrocious. And if it affects the championship, I mean, it's a penalty. That's what happens. It affects your race. That's why you don't do things like that. So if for whatever reason he had because all he needed to do was finish on the podium and he would have clinched the championship, even if Scott had won. As long as Pelot would have been second or third, he would have clinched. So it probably wouldn't have mattered that much in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, it's like I said, that's the point of a penalty, is that it affects your race, it to your detriment, and it incentivizes you or your team or whatever to not repeat that action. So if it meant that, again, in this far-flung future where just Pillow loses stacks of time, then, well, those are the consequences. And now the consequence is that you don't wrap up the championship or race early. So, yeah, I don't know what that was about, but again, atrocious call.
Yeah, I don't, no words. I really don't know what was going on there. Before we move on, gotta give a shout out to Miles Rowe for clinching the USF Pro Championship and moving up to Indy next year.
Yeah, yeah, I was super super happy to hear that. And it's funny, I don't follow the IndyCar driver development as much as I used to. But I did not know that Miles is effectively Will's protege. Yeah, I think that is super cool that, Will has clearly seen something in Miles, and Miles is very clearly fast. He's got talent and has decided to back Miles through the junior career. I think that is awesome. And it gives Will real sort of paddock dad energy that I was not expecting, like, at all. Especially given how surly, Will has a reputation for being. I can't imagine him being that paternal towards another young driver.
I mean, I've heard that like he's, despite the fact that like he does like act the way he does and people see that he is like, that's like that there's like a whole nother side of him that people usually don't see.
Yeah, that's absolutely wonderful. I love it, but yes, no, like I said, congratulations,
Wholesome.
Miles. Look forward to seeing you move up through, Indy next. You have given me frankly, a reason to start following the IndyCar ladder again. And, well, I don't know, do well in Indy next. It'll be cool to see if maybe you get an IndyCar ride.
Honestly, I think it's possible he might be a long term replacement for Will when he eventually leaves at
Honestly,
TNT.
yeah, that makes sense. And truth be told, I mean, Will has been on the grid for better part of 20 years now. How many more years does Will have left in him, honestly?
Don't know. It's a good question. Or he could be like Scott Dixon, because Scott Dixon is another person who's been there like forever, and
Yeah,
he still got it.
yeah. I mean, Scott, his rookie season was it was still the split when Scott made it to top level American Open wheel. So yeah, who knows? But that's also the other thing that's getting kind of depressing watching all of, growing up with these guys and it's like, wow, y'all are getting old, like,
Yeah,
and
it honestly
retiring.
kind of sad that like seeing like Elio that he was like leaving and we're like only being like in the 500, and I'm like, okay, I knew it was coming, but still kind of sad to see.
Yeah, Elio was my first sort of driver that I was a fan of in IndyCar. He is just such a charismatic character, and again, by all means, all indications just seems like he's kind of just an all around nice dude. And it's cool to see that he has been as successful in his career as he has. I would love for him to, for whatever reason, change his mind and go back to a full time schedule. I know he won't, but it's one of those things that it would make my child brain who loved him growing up just so happy if he did.
The next thing I'm gonna talk about, it's been a while, but I feel the need to talk about it. And it's my speculation on why I think people think the Indy 500 was rigged and similar to Abu Dhabi. Gonna get a little bit intellectual here, but I will try to keep it as simple as possible for people to understand, try to understand where I'm coming from. So, what I think is happening is that it's what people call, or at least in psychology, what we call is like lazy thinking. I'm not saying lazy thinking in like a negative way, but more so just like a matter of fact way. And that people saw Abu Dhabi happen, and it's like what we call like a heuristic, a cognitive heuristic, which is basically just mental shortcuts your mind takes in order to make it more efficient to process information. Like it happens all the time. Like it's just something humans do, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. However, it can lead you to like the wrong conclusions, and that's what I think is going on. Is that people see what's occurring is what we call like a representative heuristic, and the most recent thing that has happened that was kind of similar to like the way the Indy 500 ended. In my opinion, I don't think it is. But like, it was Abu Dhabi where it was just like kind of chaos, like just craziness going on. People are like, oh yeah, this is Abu Dhabi, even though like it's fine if you think like have a grievance with the way the 500 ended and like the way that you thought it was a bit too gimmicky, with them throwing the red flags and all that, which like I honestly didn't really care for that. Just like having them like a one lap shootout on cold tires, I didn't really think that was the best decision. However, it wasn't really unprecedented from IndyCar to throw a red flag like that. That's something that they've done before, and they try not to end the 500 under caution. So like that's how it is different from Abu Dhabi because all that stuff that happened in Abu Dhabi wasn't really precedented. That was just like the FIA just being like flippant with the rules and like letting certain cars, lapped cars, pass the safety car and stuff like that. It was like that. But that's what I think is happening. At least my speculation. Honestly, I could be wrong, but personally, I don't really think the 500 was rigged in any way. I feel like, is it impossible? No, but is it likely? Probably not. I mean, given how like prestigious the 500 is, I doubt like people would go out of their way to rig it because I feel like it would be pretty hard to get away with if you rig the 500. I don't know. Those are just my thoughts. Because honestly, I've been wanting to like talk about this forever, but haven't really figured out a good way to do it. So
Yeah, now, of course, I know next to nothing about psychology, so that is a level of cerebral that I simply cannot do. However, certainly, as in how I understand it, yes, I mean, the ending of the 500, needless to say, was very, very, very silly. And funny enough, I do believe in the sporting code, there is something that says that you do need X amount of time after a red flag period due to tire temperature. And as such, the one lap shootout at the end of the 500, well, basically, IndyCar broke their own rules, essentially.
I mean, IndyCar has a. I'm pretty sure they have a rule written in somewhere where it's like there's a rule that says you can break the rules if such and such circumstances happen.
Yeah,
Like, I
probably. Admittedly, the IndyCar sporting code isn't quite as easy to get your hands on as say F1, given that they are the FIA rather, given that they do publish that information and have it very readily publicly available. So yes, it wouldn't surprise me if there's effectively kind of a gotcha clause pasted somewhere in there.
think it's the same with NASCAR. NASCAR's rule book is like pretty elusive and secretive as well.
Yeah. Um, Mostly because it keeps, goofballs like me from, going and having a look and then calling them on it. But, yeah, it wasn't great. Yeah, calling 500 similar to, Abu Dhabi 21 is a bit of a stretch, but I certainly I agree with the sentiment that the, ending of the 500 was just frankly complete nonsense. Which I think if you paint it in kind of those broader strokes, then I get it and I agree. But yes, I think this is a case of well, it's not. It wouldn't be correlation via causation, but um, see, this is where I'm completely out of my depth. But yes, definitely looking for established patterns, or what is perceived to be a pattern, even if the reality is a bit more complex than that.
I mean, because there's a lot of things that people were critiquing. I mean, such as like I know the one thing that a lot of people said was like the dragon moves, where it's just like people weaving like all the way down to pit lane and back up. Like people are like, I mean, there were some people that were they weren't necessarily like IndyCar fans that were talking about it or had an issue with it. Some of it I did see like some F1 fans that were like, oh my god, how is this allowed? And it's like yeah, this is normal. This has happened before. Like it's normal now with the like. I think this is like a byproduct of like the aero package that IndyCar uses on like their ovals, especially like IMS. So yeah, it happens. I know like one driver. I don't remember who it was. I think it was Stefan Wilson. was kind of like, okay, maybe we need to like, I don't know, dial this back a little bit because it could get like a little bit too crazy. Which I'm like, yeah, that's fair. That's potential. Like it's possible that it could get a little bit too much if you just kind of just let them do whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't. It's weird. It feels like this year's 500 was certainly from the kind of social media sphere. It felt a bit bigger than it has in previous years. I have never seen such a large cross section of the various reporters and fans of the various other series that I watch pay attention to the 500 quite in the way that they did this year. Um, Granted, I might be, Mandela affecting a bit, and that absolutely has been the case previous, but it sure didn't feel like it. But yes,
It
and
might be because Joseph won, and Joseph was like really like popular. I guess like he was a popular winner just because
Mhm.
like he was somebody that people were like, yeah, he's due to win a 500. So could be
Mm,
that.
yeah, absolutely, that's distinctly possible. But yes, but as a result, the sort of chatter kind of after the race was almost deafening. And from first time viewers, and yes, the it is always very funny to, the dragons on the straights is always very funny to see people talk about it. It looks ridiculous to watch the back and forth, to break the toe, and then, of course, subsequently people following. But um, I think it's kind of a neat part of modern IndyCar racing. Yes, there definitely is a potential for it to go horribly, horribly wrong. I mean, heck, we've had people at IMS clatter the pit wall barrier before doing that. Um, so there is certainly the opportunity for it to end in tears, and it absolutely has. But I do think, for better and worse, that it is like I said, I think it's a part of modern IndyCar and sort of the spectacle and the strategy, if you will, of driving these cars on super speedways.
Yeah, for real. Next topic, IndyCar silly season. A bunch of like at least a lot of stuff actually happened within the time of me writing up this little outline and doing this recording because apparently, I think it's Ilot. I think he confirmed that he'll be back with Juncos Hollinger Racing,
Hmm.
and then Marcus Armstrong signed an extension, which I think that was some of this was pretty expected. And then David Malukas signed to Arrow McLaren, driving the number 6 car, taking the place of Felix. So, what are your thoughts on IndyCar silly season? Honestly, I know I've been kind of like enjoying it, even though it is a little bit hard to keep track of.
Hmm.
I'm glad there's people like Cassie on Twitter who make like who made this nice chart of who are all the drivers that are confirmed and what's still up in the air and stuff like that. It's great because honestly, it's hard to keep track of the information and it's not centralized. It's just all over the place and it's happening so quickly. So shout out to her.
Yeah, I the way I've been keeping track is, yes, through her, but also I am a regular listener and reader and viewer of the race and their just network of everything. Because, of course, namely F1, but they do IndyCar, MotoGP, and a few other series, and kind of the latter series that of each, main category. And so the IndyCar or the race, their IndyCar podcast, they go over, basically have silly season updates every week, which is very helpful to sit and listen to. Um, but yes, it's always fun to kind of watch the chopping and changing of seats and sort of the silly season, or musical chairs, if you will, given that folks sit in these cars. I like, it's always kind of fun, and granted, I mean, truth be told, modern reporting is so good that there's never really much of a shock. These things are almost rumored, usually kind of weeks in advance, usually.
Yeah, it's honestly like at least the worst kept secrets in silly season so far was at least like David to Arrow McLaren. Like,
Hmm.
yeah, a lot of people were like speculating that that was going to be the case, like way before McLaren even announced it today. We were like, yeah, like that one was pretty like a gimme. And same with Tom Blumquist to MSR. That was also another gimme. Like people pretty much knew that was gonna happen. Like there was really no shock there. Um, Unfortunately, Simon Pagenaud is not going to be racing next season, or at least it doesn't look like it. After that pretty brutal crash that he had, I think it was Mid Ohio. So unfortunately, there's that. Hopefully, when he gets better, he'll be back at some point. I know a lot of people would love to see him back. I would too. Um, and apparently, after all the dust has settled and after all the drama that has been occurring between Alex Palou and McLaren and Chip Ganassi, he's driving with Chip Ganassi next season, which is also not really shocking either. I kind of figured that like that was gonna happen. So it's like, okay, he's not going with McLaren. He clearly said that wasn't gonna happen. F1 doesn't really seem viable right now, just because I mean I don't know. At least I'm not really sure about F1. I don't know when that would even happen. I don't know which team he would go with. I've heard like I think I've heard like AlphaTauri. I've heard Williams. Obviously like McLaren. I mean, he's currently a reserve driver for I think F1's McLaren team. But I guess all of that is just like oh, we just ended back at the same spot where we started.
Yeah, and the big thing is, of course, that old Zachy boy is lodging gonna let the courts figure this one out, which is a decision. I mean, now granted, Zach is not the first person to get utterly flim-flammed by Pillow, and he will probably not be the last.
Honestly,
This
I can't even feel bad for Zach Brown being finessed because he is also finessing people. So it's just like the finesser became the finesse. So I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't like I said, I don't either. I guess if nothing other than this could potentially be kind of entertaining, as basically we're letting suits get involved here. There's always some entertainment value to be found in that. So I mean, sure. Um, but it feels so silly. Um, and actually to be fair, we talked a little bit about this in kind of our effectively open mic on the main pod, but he was linked as a reserve driver with McLaren, and there was some chatter, maybe a race seat at some point, especially as F1 silly season was hotting up, and some folks were thinking, maybe Lando might bounce, and then
I
ergo
don't know.
open up the seat. That could have been on the table if he had gone to Aero McLaren, been good, and done some testing with the Formula One program. Again, it all seems like very far flung and kind of a long shot, but I think with this whole deal, I think any F1 shot is just gone. I think
I
as
mean,
a
honestly, I mean, to be honest, like I'm kind of like okay, I have my opinions on what I think, but at the same time, I'm like it's their life, their career. They can do what they want.
yeah,
Like
absolutely.
personally, I was like, like Chip Ganassi is like a top tier team in IndyCar. So I'm like, I don't really know if you want to go from like a top tier team where you're able to win races, get podiums, and win championships to like an F1 team where you may or may not be like trundling around, waffling around in like mid pack for most of the races. It's like I don't know, it's really worth it. Same with like same deal goes for like Colton Herta, which I'm like, honestly, I don't know that. Like that was again when I said Zach Brown was finessing people. Yeah, that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, obviously, there was the fact that he didn't have enough super license points, and that was like a whole thing where the FIA, I guess, was deciding, like, are we gonna, like, I guess, like, be more lenient because he did kind of get, like, screwed over when the pandemic started with the whole super license thing.
Mhm.
And I guess they were like, no, we're not doing that. So um, I mean, I guess it's possible he still ends up in F1 if that's really what he wants to do. If Andretti is able to get that entry, I still don't know what's going on there, honestly, because that's just been a lot of back and forth between, well, I think it's like Liberty and Andretti when them like joint with Cadillac. So,
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, with the Andretti entry, yeah, there's some squabbling, just basically well, very much it's kind of team v Liberty v FIA squabbling at the moment because, of course, commercial well, and this is the thing that frustrates me. I will try my best to not get on this soapbox here and now. Um, of course, with the way the current Concord agreement is set out, it's very much laid out towards 10 teams, but as a part of that, it's of course, is revenue, through the commercial avenue as well. And if Liberty does their job, and given that a big push in, the American market again, because given that, I mean, there are three American races on the F1 calendar this year: Miami, Coda, Vegas. The idea is that if that works and then that there's the correct return, then even though the revenue that the teams generate just purely through racing that slice of the pie will be reduced with an 11th team, the commercial pickup should more than accommodate that. And you would either stay where they are or actually, in theory, make a little bit more. So this squabbling about the slightly thinner slice of the sporting pie feels desperately like sour grapes. And then, questioning the viability of the team, then, Andretti went and bagged, General Motors, which is like, okay, that's a pretty big fish. And then it's, it feels like sour grapes and broadly bad faith arguments with the Andretti entry. So honestly, I hope they get it, if nothing else, for just the overflowing of tears that are going to come from every single team principal on that grid if it happens.
I mean, even some of the like team principals, like their pushback against it has been like rather
Yeah,
flimsy. Is the only thing I can really use to describe it. Like you had somebody say, I want to say it was Toto Wolff.
I think it
You
was
had somebody
Toto.
say that, oh, we can't have another team on the grid because the track will be too crowded, and I was just like, this is probably the worst reasoning I have ever heard for why you don't want another team on the grid. It's just two more cars. Like it's really not all that. Plus, F1 is going to some tracks where other racing series race there with like at least 3 to 4 times as many cars and entries, so and they don't have a problem. It's like, yeah, are the current F1 cars, like, you could make an argument technically that the current F1 cars are a little bit too big, especially you kind of see it now with like tracks like Monaco, where it's just not interesting. Like, the most interesting thing about the Monaco GP, no shade, is qualifying.
Hmm.
Like, I see that people talk about that the most, but then when it comes to the actual race, it's crickets. Like, nobody really says that much about it. So it's like, yeah, you can make that argument, but two more cars on the grid is not gonna make that big of a difference.
Yeah, it's not it's enshrined in the sporting code up to 26 cars. And it's funny because Toto Wolff is old enough to remember when pre-qualifying was a thing in the 90s. Where you had 30 plus entries in, oh, was that 91, 92? Because you had, like Onyx, Coloni, 40, Semtech, all, Jordan was still in its infancy, all squabbling for a piece, basically the last few spots on the grid kind of at the same time. So yeah, it is, and definitely the cars are big. Actually, I tweeted about this too. During Monza, Martin Brundle was talking about the size of the cars, and said 5 meters long and 2 meters wide. So while I don't have that in sort of King's money, what I will say is that for a little bit of size context, those dimensions almost perfectly line up with the Porsche Taycan. But the Taycan is 5 meters long and 2 meters wide. The Taycan is a big car. Now much like modern Formula One cars, it's low, so certainly in photos you don't really think it's that big. But the Taycans are quite sizable, so to think that the modern cars are that big absolutely blows my mind.
Yeah, we kind of got a little bit off track on a little F1 tangent, but it's okay. It's okay. Going back to IndyCar silly season. So we do have another change that I forgot to mention. Ericsson is now with Andretti, taking the spot of Roman Grosjean at the 28. So I don't know. I think I want to know if Andretti Autosport is gonna kind of have like a little bit of a redemption arc next season. Like if they'll be any better than they have been this season. I mean, I know like they'll show glimpses of like being decent. I know the a really big killer for them this year was ovals. Their oval setups. I don't know what in God's name they do to their oval setups because they've just been awful. Like same with it was happening last year too. It's bad. They run like horrible on ovals. I don't know what's going on there. I'm like hopefully they can kind of get that figured out by next season because honestly that might be a little bit of a shock for Ericsson going from Ganassi oval setups to Andretti oval setups because I know they are definitely not on the same level as far as it is concerned with like pace on ovals. I mean, I don't know. Um, and then Grosjean, yeah, I don't. Grosjean is a very polarizing driver. He's been that way for I guess like since he's been at Andretti Autosport. Um, I know there was a really good article that somebody wrote on the race that was basically going over why his time at Andretti Autosport was like not good. Honestly, like some of the points, I'm like, yeah, I kind of agree. Like they were saying um, that some of it was like just his background growing up in like racing in Europe that he's not really used to being able to like I guess have teammates and your teammates are not your enemies. It's like there's that environment where your teammate is your greatest rival in a lot of like racing series, at least probably like open wheel series in Europe. Um, I know another thing that they said was that he is very particular about like the car setup. So part of the issue was that like the 28 car was not really set up in a way that allowed him to like perform well. Which I'm like I give him a lot of shit, and honestly, some of that I agree. However, like some of it, uh, like I guess some of the reason why he's also so polarizing is because like he'll do things, he'll have like little like mess ups, and he like it's his fault clearly, but he like doesn't usually like take responsibility when it's like his fault. And I guess like I know that's something that a lot of people haven't really, I guess, like cared about him. Um, so he's not going to be with Andretti. Clearly, I'm not sure who's going to be in the 29 car. I've heard like a few different names. I've heard like Stingray Robb who they would sign, which I'm like, I have I have feelings on that. I guess it kind of makes sense since he did drive with Andretti and Indy Next, Indy Lights, whatever. But yeah, I don't know where Grosjean will end up. I think at first I speculated that he'll just like not be an IndyCar at all, and he'll just move to like WEC, the World Endurance Championship, since he is a factory driver for Lambo, and they have a new hypercar, and he could just be on that lineup, um, driving the hypercar. But I guess there's speculation that he could go back with Dale Coyne Racing, which honestly I wouldn't feel too like honestly I feel like it might be better for him because his time in IndyCar seemed to go a lot better when he was with that team than Andretti, and it could be just because with Andretti there's like high expectations with that team, so with Dale Coyne it's a little bit more laid back, doesn't have to like do too much, have to worry about all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and perhaps I am looking for connections that are not quite there, but you said something, and I think one could be a contributing factor to the other. I think part of why Andretti has had such a hard time, particularly on ovals, and part of why I think Roman has struggled a bit is because I have noticed that it I've noticed that a lot of the Andretti drivers are not particularly adaptable. They Roman being probably kind of the poster boy for that. And so and because they all seem to, want setups to be very specific. And I wonder if that as a kind of a domino effect means that trying to gather data for what works at these circuits is a bit scattered, and trying to sift through that noise is kind of an issue for them. Um And again, this may not actually be the case, but it was something that popped in my head as potentially an explanation for why Andretti has struggled, and yes, and as a result, why Roman has struggled, because he has a very particular way he likes that car, and if that car is not that way, then he is absolutely useless. When everything is working for him, Roman is capable of being quite quick. We've seen that. He has the talent to do that. He has the speed still to do that. And then, yes, the fact that he will do something very silly and then it is somehow not his fault. In that regards, he feels kind of like a French Takuma Sato in that way. Because I love Taku to bits, and he will pull off some of the most incredible stuff you have ever seen. And then 5 turns later, do something so exceptionally stupid and ruin usually his day and somebody else's in the process, because he almost always takes somebody else with him, and it just I've called it before. It's the duality of Sata, and you kind of see that with Roman too. Roman is capable on his day of some pretty incredible stuff, but in that same day, he will do something very, very, very stupid, and then get out of the car screaming in French about how it was the other guy, and that dude needs to be penalized or whatever, even and it couldn't be any more clear that it was his fault. And I also think that hasn't gone down super well in the team either, if I'm being perfectly honest.
I mean, we saw that happen at like St. Pete. St. Pete is like one of the biggest examples, like literally the epitome of exactly what you mean when we're talking about Rojan. How it's like when like he wants to do stuff when he's like has the potential to like be fast. He is fast, and he's more than capable of like running up front. I mean, I'm pretty sure when he was with Dale Coyne, he was getting podiums. And
Mm-hmm.
he at St. Pete was fighting with Scott McLaughlin for a win potentially until they both ended up in the tire barrier, which I mean, that whole race was just really just a trip, honestly. I don't really know what to say about Andre. I mean, they just haven't been good. I mean, they're the top car that they have is 10th place in the championship standings. So it's like I want to say it's like for as prestigious as an organization as they are, maybe I'm like reading it wrong. Maybe they're not that prestigious as I think they are, but I'm like I feel like that's like a little bit unacceptable and kind of like uncharacteristic of them. But I know they had a few changes where they swapped like Brian Herta is now with Kirkwood, and I guess that seems to be working out pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Kirkwood has won 2 races this year, so I guess that seemed to be a better matchup. I'm not sure why they moved him. There was some speculation that people were like, oh, it's because Brian Herta and Colton don't get along, because there was a lot of that, a whole compilation that the IndyCar on NBC account posted of like him and his dad like having these exchanges, him yelling at his dad, and it's like I don't know, maybe you're making it seem like they don't get along that well, but yeah, I don't know
Yeah,
about this team.
yeah. I don't know. I think of the modern Andretti as kind of the Ferrari of IndyCar. Prestigious name. And has seen some absolutely great success. But it seems like at the same time, for as storied an organization as they are, it seems like they perennially underachieve to some degree.
Another silly season thing is Linus Lundqvist is now at CGR. Glad he finally got a seat. In my opinion, he kind of got shafted a little bit after the end of the Indy Lights season last year.
Oh yeah.
Didn't really care for that, but I'm glad he's with CGR. Everything's fine now.
Yes, no, I'm super happy that he's got a full-time seat.
Honestly, and I mean, he seems like he showed glimpses of like being able to perform pretty well, at least
Hmm.
in the races that he was subbing for. I think Simon.
Yeah, no, he got thrown in at the deep end, and he's made it work. So I'm, like I said, super happy to see him get a full-time seat. I'll be interested to see what he does next year with, frankly, just more time, because in case of he hadn't been in the car prior to when he got thrown in the first time, and then Bill's a sink or swim, and by all accounts he's swam. And now there's lots to be said about Indy Lights, and then um taking the step up to IndyCar proper. Granted, Stingray Rob, you know what? Cool name. Your parents are probably kind of weird, but the name is great. Um, but Rob has absolutely stunk up the place this season. Just completely. And it almost feels
I
like a
mean,
waste of a seat.
technically he's ahead of Peterson in the rookie standing, at least last I checked. But like, I don't know.
Uh,
His performance has not been the greatest.
which I okay, granted, nobody ever talks about Peterson either, so maybe
I
you
mean,
know what?
Peterson's just there. He's literally just there. And honestly, I was not too like. I was very skeptical about AJ Foyt making the decision to sign Peterson and Ferrucci and have them on the same team, especially with this small team they are, and like the fact that had they were sponsored by Rocket, but Rocket had their issues and isn't capable of providing sponsorship anymore. And I'm like, are you sure these are really the two people you want to sign? Like this might be a very costly lineup.
Hmm.
It didn't seem to be too bad though. I mean, really, it was like St. Pete was probably like the worst.
Hmm.
And like both cars, both of them were out on the first lap. But a lot of other people were too, unfortunately. But I mean, I don't know. I don't. Peterson, I think, is also like another one, like AJ Foyt, like that team. Still, like they haven't figured out what's going on with their drivers.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, truth be told, I mean, honestly, I guess for a rookie season at kind of a small backmarker team, the fact that it takes me a second to remember that Peterson exists, honestly, probably isn't the worst thing in the world. That means he's not binning the car all the time. And that's probably as much as they can hope for right now. But I don't know. I feel like, especially given that Linus won, um, Indy next, and given that Rob has not been great, I cannot help but feel like that was just, frankly, a waste of a signing, honestly.
I mean, honestly, I want to say that maybe it was possibly the fact that last year's Indy Lights field, which wasn't that great. I mean, Linus is obviously a good driver, but like I don't know. I mean, Peterson I think finished like what, like fifth or something in the Indy Lights standings last season. Stingray Rob finished like third. I'm pretty
Mhm.
sure. Which I'm like, okay, I guess it kind of makes sense. I mean, obviously, I'm pretty sure they signed Stingray because like he had like financial backing,
Yeah, funding.
so they could afford to do that. I don't know. I don't really know. Like, I wanna say like maybe give him another season at Dale Coyne just because like maybe it's like rookie season type. You know, you have to work out the kinks of rookie season because I know Kirkwood is another driver that did not do well at all his rookie season. So I'm like maybe that's what's going on here. I don't know.
Yep.
Um,
And I'll be more than happy to eat my hat later if it comes to it. But if Stingray doesn't do super well next year, I will absolutely be happy to mark that as a flop of a signing. And I don't know, maybe, like I said, if I'm wrong, I don't know. I'll I don't know. Maybe I'll do a shoey like Monte did or something.
Maybe you'll have to. I don't know. We'll see. Next topic is the World Endurance Championship is back from their hiatus, and they're at the 6 hours for the 6 hours of Fuji at Fuji Speedway in Japan. And I guess the storyline is who's gonna be able to beat Toyota, which they are at their home track. So I'm like, I don't really know who's gonna be able to do it. I would put money on maybe like Ferrari, Cadillac, maybe, and Peugeot, since Peugeot seems to have they've had massive improvement since the beginning of the season. Oh my god, like Sebring, they were that was very questionable performance by them at Sebring, but they've seemed to they've gotten it together, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So much so, because when I was out and about today, checking in on these things, as one does, so much so that other teams, particularly at this weekend, are actually taking notice of Pujo. So much the fact that somebody, I don't remember who, but somebody within one of the other teams said that went so far as to call them underestimated. So clearly, there's some pace here. I don't think Peugeot will do it. I'd be honestly, I think everybody's gonna be hard pressed to top Toyota. I think Ferrari probably has the best shot out of anybody. But I'm liking the resurgence in form of, or rather, just finding form, finding pace, full stop. Uh, from Peugeot, because I think the car looks fantastic. It's so cool, and it was such a shame that it was so bad early. Um,
I
but
mean, like, yeah, I mean, they led the 24 hours of Le Mans, so I'm like,
mhm,
okay, maybe I'm completely wrong about this team. Maybe I've underestimated them severely. Um, another team, Porsche Penske. I'm not too sure about them. Honestly, this year's been pretty. They've been on the struggle bus. I guess I
mhm,
would say. I mean, I know like IMSA, they do well. Like at least for like the short sprint races, like Long Beach went well. A few other races have gone well for them. Like Road America went well for them. The 6 hours Glen at Walking the Glen, that went well for them until that little penalty happened where they got disqualified for, I guess, the skid block on the car or something. So I mean that was like the only endurance race I can say they've done well. I know Daytona was pretty rough for them. I mean, they weren't as bad as BMW. Like, they weren't that bad, but they also weren't good. I mean, they didn't have, like, BMW had one of their cars die within the first hour of the race. So, I mean, they weren't that bad, and they did have a lot of, like, the main thing with them, or at least I would say the main issue with the Porsche 963s is just reliability. It's just horrible. I don't really know, like, what to say about that.
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah. It seems like it's a short run car, effectively. Provided you don't ask it to do too much for too long, it seems like it's pretty quick. But the moment that you start saying, hey, let's go longer than a couple of hours, then it just goes, actually,
I mean, one
no.
of the cars died at Spa earlier.
Yeah.
I'm like, this really doesn't have me. This doesn't look too good. It does not look too good
mm,
for the Porsches.
Yeah, now granted, we've seen it before. We've seen, when they are contesting in, the GT classes, Porsche is nothing if not tenacious. So they will work on this car, and they will work on this car, and they will work on this car until it's successful. Some of it is just a bit of stubbornness. Some of it, frankly, I think is a little bit of pride. I mean, the tales of the 956, the 962s just destroying everything for, a decade straight. Well, actually, between the two cars, that was like 20 years of top level dominance in sports car racing. So there is a bit of just personal pride on the line, I think, for them. And I think they will work on it. They don't have as far to go as, Peugeot and WEC or BMW and IMSA. Um,
I mean,
they,
BMW's actually made pretty good improvement too in
they
the IMSA.
have. Yeah, but they are certainly not starting as far forward as, and Toyota and Ferrari in WEC, and then like Cadillac and Acura and in IMSA. Speaking of which, it disappoints me that actually the Cadillac is not more competitive in WEC. Is a bummer because the thing sounds incredible. It sounds
I
like the
know it sounds great. It sounds like one of the best sounding like GTP hypercars, whatever.
Yeah, no, it sounds like the world is ending when it bump starts leaving the pits. It is fantastic. And it reminds me of when the C7Rs were running the cross-plane V8 and sounded like thunder running around. But hopefully they'll get that together too. I think Cadillac is spreading themselves a little bit too thin, if I'm being perfectly honest, trying to contest both IMSA and WEC. I don't think that was the move, but that is that's a think piece for another time.
for sure. So I guess we have apparently Stoffel Van Dorn is in Pojo filling in for Nico Mueller because he apparently broke his collarbone or something like that. I think it's like that was announced like a week ago or something. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'll be momentarily, temporarily rooting for Pojo, however you want to call it, for this race. And at least if Porsche doesn't do well, I'll have Peugeot and Cadillac as fallback options.
Yeah.
Somebody else though that we might have to talk about is Glickenhaus.
Ooh, yes.
Oh Lord, that
Yeah.
team is a mess.
Yeah, but you mean you know why just the same as I do. It's Jim. It is Jim. It was Jim. It always has been. Jim has always been the biggest problem with that team.
I mean, I've heard people say that he's putting it frankly like that he's like an asshole to a lot of people in the grid.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's the reason why a lot of series just don't wanna be bothered with him, and why it always feels like it's a big fight when he's trying to get a car in a series, is because it's like, "Oh, it's you again." Um
Honestly, it's just a shame because honestly, like they I don't think they're at Fuji. I mean, honestly, I think Monza, the 6 hours of Monza, was their last race of the World Endurance Championship season, at least this year. I have no idea if they'll be back next season.
I
I mean,
doubt it.
if Jim is able to get it together, maybe, but it's probably not looking likely.
Mhm. And this is one of those things, while I will sit here and tap, I will do all kinds of dances and pray for the downfall of Glickenhaus, which we have gotten, and it makes me so happy. And that's just because, like I said, Jim is, I honestly, he's kind of like the Flavio Briatore of endurance racing. That's probably the best way I can think to phrase it with the way he acts. Of course, I feel bad for all of the ground floor staff who are effectively out of a job because of this. Like, that sucks so much. And my heart absolutely goes out to them. I'm hoping, maybe other teams will, scoop them up. Minimum is just redundant personnel. So, they can, collect a paycheck and, like, eat and feed their families. But it's just, this is a long time coming for Glickenhaus. Um, I'm sure because there were lots of reasons thrown around for Glickenhaus's effective withdrawal. Something I had heard, homologation related stuff, but also Jim has been throwing a temper tantrum throughout this whole thing. So trying to get a straight reason for why, like I said, they've basically withdrawn, I have had some trouble finding.
I mean, it seems like Glickenhaus is essentially like on their deathbed, like as soon as the season started, honestly, like they really didn't even get that far. I know you
Hmm.
still have Van Wall. They're just there,
Which
with
I
every race, just waffling around at the back of the hypercar field, just doing
which
whatever, taking their time, not even bothering to really race or be competitive with the other hypercar teams.
Good job to Vanwall for outliving Glickenhaus. That was not something. Yes, I knew that the team wasn't in great shape, broadly speaking, in the lead up to the season, but I still wouldn't have had Vanwall outliving Glickenhaus on my sort of sports car racing bingo card, like, at all.
Yeah, I don't know. I it's just honestly it's funny. I mean, the only thing that's not funny is again like people unfortunately losing their jobs over it. But yeah. So the next week, IMSA is back at IMS, the Brickyard, for I think it's called the Battle on the Bricks, something like that. Um, I don't know. What are your expectations for that race?
That's hmm. You know, I enjoy IMSA at yeah, IMSA in Indy is cool. I figure it'll probably be the Acuras running away for with it in GTP. They have just been stupendously quick. Like, stupendously quick in the GTP field. I've really been enjoying, and we've kind of watched this progress over the last few races, but in GTs, it's with Corvette and Lexus has been really heating up here these last few rounds, and it has been fantastic to see. I guess I'll put my stake in the ground here. Announce allegiances and such. Given that this is effectively the final year of a factory Corvette program, and well, I have had yellow Corvettes plastered in on bedroom walls in offices forever. Love those guys. So I would love to see them, put one over on Lexus here. We'll have to kind of see because I mean, like I said, those two are so close. It seems in just general performance, it just kind of seems like whoever can keep their nose clean is who takes class honors that weekend. So we'll have to see, but I think it should be a good time.
Honestly, I feel obliged to rep Corvette just because of Jordan Taylor, we happen to
Yes.
share the same name. So I'm like, you know what? That's cool. I pretend, running joke that I have is that they like that's me in a past life or something. I don't know. I mean, it would be nice if that was true. Um, I mean, you know what? I probably do think the same thing. It's probably going to be Acura running away with it. You know, if at least it might turn out to be, if it's Meyer Shank, well, they might as well just enjoy it while it lasts now because they're likely not going to be back in IMSA come 2024. Or it's not looking like it. It's not officially confirmed yet, but that's the speculation.
Mm. So I mean, given that it is speculated, I would assume that's going to be resources funneled back to IndyCar.
It's probably like some of it yeah, probably they'll just be focusing on IndyCar, and then some of it is also like they're probably giving that entry to Wayne Taylor
Hmm.
since they're aligned with Andretti now and stuff like that, and they said they were expanding to two entries, so I think the assumption is like that car will go to them, and then Meyershank will just focus on IndyCar. Um, I don't really know if they would let Blomqvist run IMSA still, just with like another team. So I know like he raced with like I think it was United Autosport with like and Le Mans, like some other like races as well. I don't know if they would let him do that because he could do that like run LMP2. Um, don't know. I guess I don't know. And then Jordan Taylor is back with Wayne Taylor Racing in the GTP class, so that'll be interesting.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there. Yeah, it would be a shame to see them go. They've kind of become a fixture on the IMSA grid. So it would be a bummer, but I mean, we see these shakeups periodically where it feels like big teams or at the very least successful teams go away. And shakeups with regs and stuff. Yeah, I joke with an old friend. It feels like this happens about every 20 years with IMSA, and I guess we're about due apparently.
I mean, some of it, like some of the speculation was that after the like Rolex 24 cheating scandal thing
Oh
went down, that
yeah.
probably damaged their relationship with Honda, and it's kind of, it's irreparable. I guess they can't really do much about it, so they're just like
Yeah,
leave
because that was
together.
just Meyer Shank. Because yeah, Wayne Taylor Racing, yeah, they didn't get bopped for the because it was technical infringement
It was
related
like
to
tire
deploy.
pressure data. They were
Oh well, that was
manipulating.
the tire. Yes, they had gotten a warning from race control a couple of times about use of hybrid deployment, but yes, it was tire pressure stuff that got them in trouble in the end. I'm still super surprised they didn't lose that overall victory.
I mean,
Um,
they still have the watches, so it's like I mean
yeah.
it's not like you would be able to get the watches back from them. I mean, I wouldn't want to try to do that. So I mean,
Send a letter in the mail to repossess it.
like yeah, we're repossessing your Rolex watches. Please return them by such and such date. It's like no, they're not gonna do that. So it's like
No, they're
I don't know.
not.
And then I don't know. It's like is that a legit win or do people consider it a fraud win?
Yeah, I don't know. I sit kind of on the fence there, on the one hand, because I have spent so much of my life, steeped in NASCAR, and I was getting into it, right as kind of, the party era of the late 90s was ending, so my part of my brain goes, okay, well, if you ain't cheating, you ain't innovating. But on the other hand, race sports car racing, is so finely honed and measured and balanced and to keep racing fair. That's the whole point of like balance of performances so that anybody gets a shot. I mean, we can talk about balance of performance and how it often doesn't work. Um,
Prime example was the Fast Porsche at Daytona. Oh my god.
yeah, the Porsches were all the GT Porsches were dog slow that weekend, but the fast Porsche in particular was just so bad.
They were so bad. Like it was just so freaking painful to see that, especially after like how competitive they were last year with like the
Mhm.
finish where they both wrecked or one person wrecked. Unfortunately, Lawrence Van Dort. It was funny just seeing him like complain about it on social media during like the race, the times like he wasn't driving. So I'm like, this is really funny because I'm like, what is going on with this team? Why are they so slow? And it's like I think unfortunately like they knew that their BOP was set in stone like during like the practices and
Mhm.
qualifying because like it apparently like at least one of my friends went to like the Rolex 24 race that happened this past year that like that he said like all the drivers looked like dejected at like the autograph session. So it's like I think they knew at that point. So it's just like it's just painful. Might as well just twist the knife.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there was some chatter about if BOP was going to get adjusted for the Porsches. And I don't know if IMSA ever made an official statement or if this was just stuff that the media
It
had managed to find out, where basically they were just like, yeah, no, the Porsches are just, they're screwed.
I mean it happened after like it was kind of like low key stuff that kind of happened um like after the Daytona race happened, like in between the time Daytona happened and Sebring, like there was a lot of like um I guess chatter where people were like I think one of like the team leaders I guess was like I guess they had gone to IMSA and were like, "Oh, we need this adjustment in order to like be competitive." And then like IMSA was like, "No, we're not allowing that." And then the other guy, like one of the, like the team leaders, were like, "Well, you know what? We're just gonna withdraw all of
Hmm.
our entries from the race if we can't be competitive." So like,
Yeah.
there was a lot of like talk about that. I know like Lawrence Van Dor talked about that on his like podcast with like his brother. And honestly, it was really funny because his brother seemed more mad about it than he was. They were like, "Yeah, you know what? You should just withdraw all the entries and just basically just say fuck it altogether because it's like there's no point in like spending the money to race and not be competitive or be able to like run up front. It'd just be a waste of time and a waste of money." I'm like, yeah, go off. I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, it's funny because I mean, Lawrence is, really feeling the pain because the Porsches last year when they still had a little bit of support from Porsche, the factory efforts, Lawrence was driving and those things were spectacularly quick. And it was the opposite problem is that really the GTLM Porsches were way quicker than everything else in that field. The Lexus couldn't do anything, Corvette couldn't do anything. It just didn't matter.
I mean, I
Um,
think it did get like they
I mean, they
did
nerfed
something
it
because
back
they did
a
get
bit.
a podium at
Mhm.
Sebring,
Yeah.
so it worked out somehow.
Yeah, but certainly 2022 and GT was the year of Porsche. It was very thoroughly convincing because as an unrepentant Corvette racing fan, I was moaning like, okay, when are you gonna do something about the Porsches, please?
Another thing worth noting is that IMSA moved the Watkins Glen date for next year to avoid it clashing with the 24 hours of Spa, which I'm like, good on them for that because I know they got a lot of blowback on social media from people for having that clash, me included. Okay, I'm not
Hmm.
gonna act like I wasn't sitting up there uh, trashing them for it because I certainly was. So
Yeah,
glad that got worked out.
yeah, absolutely. And I understand scheduling and things. I know it's complex. I know TV deals and track times and what have you. I know that. However, who at the end of the day, understanding that the 24 hours of Spa was literally the same time, who signed off on that? I would be very interested to know how somebody, and clearly the multiple people, looked at this and said, "You know what? This is okay. This is absolutely perfect. 10 out of 10, no notes." That doesn't really make sense to me at all.
The IMSA president and the whole IMSA and co were in the studio, like, yeah, this calendar will make them not want to watch the race. Drop it.
I mean, that's what it feels like. I don't I just don't get it. I realize I've said that a few times here, but I haven't the foggiest idea how these things get signed off on. How, like I said, it goes through a chain of command ostensibly, and then everybody goes, "Yep, looks good to me." Because that was always gonna they were always gonna get blowback for having it at the same time. There was no other possible way that that could have ended. And especially for people who, I mean, because I mean, perhaps unsurprisingly, there's lots of crossover between IMSA and WEC. It's almost like a lot of the same cars run, and so people are interested.
I mean, luckily they avoided. I guess you could kind of say they dodged a bullet a little bit because they it was just fans that they got blowback from. I didn't really see any drivers like jump on board or like get on them about it yet. But if they hadn't done anything, they probably would have gotten some negative feedback from drivers that do compete in both of those races. So kind of kind of avoided that there.
Yeah, absolutely. So good on them for fixing it. I mean, they put out a fire that they made, let's be perfectly clear. But um, yeah, no, good on them for getting it sorted out so that this won't be an issue next year. And that if you are feeling thusly inclined to watch both, or drivers are feeling thusly inclined to compete in both, then that can be done without any significant issues.
So the last thing I have is, I guess, DTM is at, I don't even know how you pronounce this racetrack,
Oh,
despite the fact that I know German. I'm pretty
yes,
sure it's the Sachsen ring.
yep.
Um, I honestly know nothing about that track. I haven't followed DTM that much this year. I did like watch a few races from last year, and yeah, the driving last season is a little bit questionable.
Hmm.
Very questionable.
Yeah, it honestly the driving last year reminded me a lot of particularly late 90s super touring uh in UK, where they were just bouncing off of each other constantly. Um Last year, this year seems to be a lot better because I mean DTM just became a giant meme for a while. Look at all these idiots, can't drive. Saxon Ring is kind of fun. Granted, I've not paid a ton of attention to it, especially with well, I mean, they're basically GT cars. So I was gonna say with the new cars, but I mean they're GT3s, so there's not really much. But certainly, MotoGP makes stops at Saxon Ring, and it is always fantastic when MotoGP is in town. So I said if I can find some time this weekend, I'll have to plug in. It's just also DTM starts at a time that is absolutely obtuse if you live in North America, so it's so difficult to try to watch.
No, for real. Like last one, it was like at 9 a.m., which honestly, I ended up, for whatever reason, being up at that time anyway, just because my body decided to wake me up at 9 a.m. on a Saturday. So I'm like, forget it. I'll just watch it because I can't go back to sleep. I don't know. I mean, going back to what you said about DTM as being a big meme, I'm sure the whole like the 2021 finale thing did not help that at all. I'm sure it made it worse.
Yeah, it's just DTM is just it feels like it's kind of dying a slow death right now, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Probably.
They've changed up, sort of the car formula a couple of times here in the last handful of years to try to help it, because I mean we had basically silhouette cars for a while, which seems directly antithetical to the whole point of DTM, I mean, Deutsche Touring Meisters. That's their touring cars, or at least that was the idea anyway. And we got so far from that, they were basically mini prototype cars. Or I guess that's big prototype cars, given that they were loosely based on a bunch of sort of mid-sized German performance cars. But anyhow, that's besides the point. It's just like I said, they were basically prototype cars in the way that they drove, in the way that they followed, in the way that they raced. So, and it really killed the product. Those years, you sure you remember, back in the like 20, I guess it was like 2012, 2013 to when 2016, 17 when they moved to the turbo 4. Those high revving 4-liter V8s that they used that rev to 9,500 RPM that sounded absurd. That was fun. That was a lot of fun. They sounded incredible. But even that doesn't make up for just a fundamentally bad product on track. Then they aligned themselves with a Super GT for a bit, and that didn't work. That didn't work at all. Um, and then yes, now like I said, we've got a bunch of GT3 cars. So, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't really have much to say about it. It's kind of like I'll just watch the races, whatever, and see what happens and see if I'm going to talk about it the next episode we do. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Yes, so I hope everybody has enjoyed listening to the first episode.
It was very
Um,
long, but at least maybe you can just be like preoccupied doing something and like listening at the same time.
yeah, absolutely. And thankfully, this so far this recording isn't actually running any longer than Victory Lane Vibes usually does, so we're good there. But before we wrap things up, do we want to do since it's just you and I, you say we want to do pluggables here? Various social media accounts and things for folks to find us.
Yeah, basically, I usually just plug my Twitter. I don't really usually let people follow my Instagram unless I'm like comfortable with them, know them
Mhm.
well. So you can find me at Scooteria JT. Scooteria underscore JT is my Twitter handle, X handle, whatever it is now. But that's where you can find me. That's usually where I'm like the most active. So if you have any like feedback, comments, suggestions, or again like people that you would potentially want us to try and get on here and have a conversation with. Again, I said like I have a few people in mind. I will try to reach out to and see if we can get them on here. Um, yeah, feel free to let me know.
And you can find me just about anywhere. At a Spectre of sorts. Spectre, like the Bond movie, Spectre. Um, and I will be more than happy to chat with you if you want to talk shop about motorsports. And you can find me on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. I simply won't do it. I am there on Instagram as well. Like I said, it's basically my handle everywhere. If you like pretty pictures, Danny R. Brown Photography is the Instagram that I use for that. Um, so, with that, thank you very much for listening, and we will see you next time.
Peace.